Tensions have been high following two explosions in Mahas town in the region of Hiran. At least 35 people have been killed and 40 others injured in the attacks. Al-shabaab militants say they were behind the two car bombs. Somali security officials say the militia group targeted two military bases in Mahas town. The attack is the latest in a string of attacks launched by the Al-Qaeda affiliated group since government forces pushed out the fighters from their territory. According to Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, operations by the Somali army have killed hundreds of al-Shabaab fighters and recaptured dozens of settlements. Well, let's get more on this situation in Somalia. I'm now joined by CGTN's Mohammed Kahie. He's in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Also with us, Dr. Hassan Khaneje, Director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies here in Kenya. He's joining us via Zoom from Nairobi. Let's start off with you, Mohammed. What is the latest from the twin blasts in central Somalia?
Well, so far the number of people who lost their lives in these twin blast car bomb attacks in Mahas district of Hiran region yesterday morning stands at 35 people. Among them is a family of 8 unfortunately perished in this attack. More than 40 others people were injured in this particular attack, and they have been airlifted to the capital Mogadishu, where they have been admitted to various hospitals. Still on this, there was a meeting by the Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre, emergency national security meeting following this attack, whereby they discussed with top security officials, including the intelligence and the army, which is leading these operations, on how to prevent similar attacks targeting civilians. So also one of the important things that came out from that meeting is Somalia calling for a lifting of arms embargo, which is trying to limit its capabilities to fight terrorism. And the Prime Minister said that it is engaging the international organizations related to lifting of this arms embargo, like the UN Security Council, to try and get these sanctions lifted so that Somali security agencies can gain access to latest weapons so that they can fight terrorism back home.
All right. So, Dr. Khaneje, you know, the situation in Somalia has been ongoing for decades now, but the Somali government troops have been making a lot of progress in the battle against the al-Shabaab in the recent past, going by the government's announcements. Yet occasionally, as we've just heard, the terror group inflicts horrific damages. How would you describe the al-Shabaab's remaining strength now, and where do they present the greatest threat currently?
The recent efforts by the government and allied militia has been significant, and they've managed to disperse, al-Shabaab in different directions. However, they've not managed to destroy al-Shabaab. And so, being a cornered cat, al-Shabaab right now is trying to fight from all directions. And of course, the easiest and quickest way to make an impact, of course, is through select and targeted terror attacks, like what we have seen in recent months.
Mohammed, you know, we've also been hearing that al-Shabaab attacks are restricting deliveries of aid that millions of people in Somalia need at the moment, especially during the current drought. What measures are being taken to ensure that much of that aid actually reaches those who need it the most?
Yes, that is true. Blocking of road transport and access of basic supplies to areas they control has been one of the main strategies the armed group to sustain and maintain their ongoing war in Somalia. And we have seen that the worst came when the Somalia experienced the impact of the drought 3 years ago, where 7 million people have been impacted directly by this drought, and most of them living in al-Shabaab controlled areas. Humanitarian agencies could not reach them. They could not provide them emergency food assistance because al-Shabaab could not allow them. So those people were forced to be displaced or out of al-Shabaab areas and come to big cities like Mogadishu, where they can get access to assistance by the humanitarian agencies. Well, international calls to al-Shabaab and calls by both the international community and the Somali government to al-Shabaab to not weaponize this war and using people, humanitarian issues as a shield, fell in deaf ears. That's why one of the people say one of the reasons that has instigated local people to rise up against al-Shabaab and take their weapons was such things, because al-Shabaab was preventing them to, despite taking their property by force, they were also forcing them people not to get access to humanitarian assistance when they needed. And this is one of the reasons that many analysts say has led to this war against al-Shabaab, people rising up against al-Shabaab and fighting them. And we have seen that in the past 6 months. Somali army and also the local mobilization force, that is the local community, have tried to take more than 60 villages from al-Shabaab and swaths of land from al-Shabaab, and that has become a big threat to al-Shabaab now.
All right. So, Dr. Khaneja, the Somali government seems to be making efforts to get the UN arms embargo lifted to enable the government fight the terror group. So, what would it take for this embargo to be lifted, and how can that help in the war against al-Shabaab?
There is a general consensus actually among many African countries right now that the arms embargo that was imposed on Somalia needs to be lifted, in part because Somalia is constrained right now, the Somali government, in the ability of it to execute a war against al-Shabaab. Unfortunately, al-Shabaab does not play by international law and therefore is not constrained by the same embargo. And they're still able to source for weapons either from illicit arms smugglers or from other conflict theaters within the region. And so this has meant that there is an imbalance when it comes to that war. However, one thing is going to be required of the United Nations is to actually be able to re-examine that embargo and perhaps move expediently to lift some of the sanctions limiting the ability of the Somali government, not just to fight against al-Shabaab, but to provide actually security for all citizens, especially in the light or in the wake of absence of law and order in Somalia for much of the last 3 decades. And so I think the timing is actually appropriate if, in fact, it were to happen sooner rather than later.